Next, let's combine a couple of propositions. We can do that with what are called logical connectors. The words and, or, and then the phrase if then can be used to connect two or more separate propositions into a single statement. And then we can examine that single statement in terms of that overall statement being true or false. Examples of using and, or, and then. So let's say I have the two statements, Alexi has a cat and Alexi has a dog. So I can connect them with the word and for a certain meaning. Or I could connect them with or. Alexi has a cat or Alexi has a dog. And then I can say if Alexi has a cat, then Alexi has a dog. Now if then is a little different. The order of the statements in an if then statement is very specific and can change how the statement is interpreted. And in or statements, it doesn't matter which one you put first or second. The and or works in a similar way in that respect. The order doesn't matter. But in an if then, the order matters. So we're going to spend a little bit more time on if then in this chapter. All right, let's start with and. Start with one of the easier ones. And statements are what we call conjunctions. A conjunction is true only when both of the statements that are connected by the and are true. An and statement is very, very restrictive. Both of the statements that are connected with the and have to be true for the entire statement to be true. If either or both is false, the and statement is false itself. So all it takes is one part of the statement to be false in an and statement, and the whole thing is false. Let's look at some examples. Rabbits are fish, and rattlesnakes have 4 legs. Well, we've got two statements connected by an and. Rabbits are fish is a false statement. Rattlesnakes have 4 legs is also false. Snakes don't have legs. So what we have are two false statements connected by an and. That means the entire statement is also false. Anytime one or both of the statements is false, the entire statement is false in an and statement. Our second example, Math 105 is a PCC class and Portland Community College is located in Oregon. Well, the first statement, Math 105 is a PCC class, is true. As you know, you're in the class right now. Portland Community College is located in Oregon. That's also true. So we have two true statements connected by an and. That means we have a true statement overall. Pretty straightforward. If they're both false, we've got a false answer. If they're both true, then we've got a true result. Let's look at the third. Here we have Oprah Winfrey and Bill Clinton were U.S. presidents. Now, I could have said Oprah Winfrey was a U.S. president and Bill Clinton was a U.S. president, but because the conclusion of that statement that they were both U.S. presidents is the same, I can combine the and with just the names. Oprah Winfrey and Bill Clinton were U.S. presidents. Well, let's look at each of these people. Oprah Winfrey was not a U.S. president, so that statement would be false. Bill Clinton was, so we have a true statement. So here we have one of each. When you have one of each in an and statement, you have a false statement because an and statement is restrictive. The only way it's true is if both statements are true. And here we only have one that's true, so this statement is false. Moving on to or statements. An or statement is also called a disjunction. Now, before we get to the rules for true and false with or statements, let's talk about or in everyday life. Or can be interpreted one of two ways in our everyday world. It can be interpreted as inclusive, meaning either or both, or it can be interpreted as exclusive, meaning either but not both. Okay, in our everyday life, we kind of look at the situation to determine whether or means inclusive or exclusive. So for instance, if you were asked, will you have the vegan or the meat option at dinner? Generally, if you're going to dinner for an event, they're going to give you one or the other option, not both. So this is an exclusive or. You're going to get the vegan option or you're going to get the meat option, but not both. At this maybe charity dinner, say. A second example, we want to hire someone who speaks Spanish or Vietnamese. Now, if you're hiring somebody, You want them to speak Spanish or Vietnamese. I'm sure you wouldn't mind if they spoke both, right? So you'd be fine if they spoke Spanish or Vietnamese or both. So this is a situation where inclusive would be just fine with you, an inclusive or. So or can be exclusive or inclusive, but in mathematics, we always think of or as being inclusive. We always think of it as being inclusive in mathematics. All right, so or is always going to be inclusive in mathematics. So the rules. A disjunction or an or statement is true when one, the other, or both, and maybe a better way to say that would be either or both of the statements connected by the or, either or both of the statements connected by the or are true. So an or statement is very inclusive. All it takes is one, the other, or both of the statements that are in the or statement to be true for the statement to be true. The only way it's going to be false is if both statements are false. If both statements are false, then the or statement itself is false. So if we go back and look at those same examples that we had when we were looking at the and statements, rabbits or fish. I tried to say fish first both times. Rabbits or fish, we knew from before that that was a false statement. Or rattlesnakes have 4 legs, that's also false. So if we have 2 false statements, then the statement is false. Now that's one thing that's consistent with both the and statement and the or statement. Likewise, if you have 2 true statements, Math 105 is a PCC class, that's true, and Portland Community College is located in Oregon, that's true, then we have a true statement as well. Where or statements differ from and statements is when we have one of each. Oprah Winfrey was not a U.S. president. Bill Clinton was a U.S. president. Here we have one false statement and one true statement. But in an or statement, all we need is one or the other to be true. If either one is true, then the whole thing is true. So this last statement, Oprah Winfrey or Bill Clinton were U.S. presidents, that is considered a true statement because one of the 2 parts was true. All we need is one to be true, and the whole thing is true.